In today's business world, being an average CEO is no longer an option. That's why we're committed to equipping you with the resources and the tactics necessary to not just survive, but to thrive. You're listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline podcast, where we are more than just a voice in the crowd.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Not Your Average CEO Lifeline. Today we are talking about recovering and navigating brand crises and turning regressions into opportunities. I have the pleasure of joining us, Shailendra and Shalini. Can you talk to our audience about yourselves, your business, your book, and introduce your expertise to them?
Thank you so much, Nicole and Danielle, for having us on your podcast. So my name is Shalini Jain. I'm an associate professor of management at the Milgard School of Business. My area of research expertise is social issues in management. I work on gender equity, ethics, corporate social responsibility. And so this book is an area of my passion, and I will let Shailendra take over and introduce himself.
Hello, good morning, Nicole and Danielle. Thank you so much for having us on this podcast. We are both super excited about it. So my name is Shailendra Pratap Jain. I go as Shelly, if that's easier for you to address me as. And I am a professor of marketing and international business at University of Washington in Seattle at Foster School of Business. And one of my research streams is brand strategy. I look at various marketing issues through the lens of consumer psychology. How do consumers process information which are marketing related? And one of the domains within that broad domain is brand. How do consumers think about brands? What makes a brand strong? What makes a brand weak? And several related issues. So the confluence of my interest in brand strategy and Shalini's interest in corporate social responsibility and business ethics comes together in this book. And we are excited to share some of our learnings in the process.
Well, we're excited to have you and to hear your incredible advice and your expertise. So staying on topic with our brand of our episode, our topic, can you explain what constitutes a brand transgression and why it's significant in a threat to companies?
So a brand transgression is a violation of some norm or expectation between the brand and its stakeholders. It could be a product failure. It could be a violation of a social norm or value, poor quality product. And so Benjamin Franklin famously said that no one can escape death and taxes. And we humbly submit that the best brands, even the most eminent of brands, will face a transgression at some point. And so we want to add a transgression to that list. And our book uses research from about 50 years. We have examined cases of various companies and culled it with this roadmap of both positive and negative examples of how brands faced crises and didn't respond appropriately to their disadvantage or responded brilliantly to their recovery. So happy to talk about that further.
I'd love to hear, because our clients, our listeners are small business owners, leaders, entrepreneurs. What would be some examples or some real world examples of transgressions that you may have seen? So other than like a product failure, but maybe thinking of a service-based business, thinking what a transgression could be, what might happen, something for someone to look out for.
Thank you for that question, Danielle. So I'll give you a few examples which we cover in the book. We cover about 40, 50 examples with 25 very focused case studies. So we will pull out from those. A more recent example, which we do not cover because this book was already, under publication when this thing happened, was Apple iPad released an ad in April, which showed industrial machinery crushing a lot of art and creative objects like sculptures, guitars, paint boxes, pianos, paintings. And at the end of that crush, which is what the name of the ad was, emerges this glistening iPad. And the tagline is the thinnest iPad ever. So the import of the ad, the intent of the ad was to show how brilliant, creative, and versatile iPad is. Unfortunately, it landed sort of sideways on its intended target consumers, which was a creative community. And they had, in a manner of speaking, a trigger and a nosebleed when they saw this ad. And globally, there was backlash. And the reason was because this community perceived this ad to be pointing to the possibility of AI crushing creative pursuits of human beings. And and there was a lot of comments and blogs, and very, very famous people said a lot of not very pleasant things in response to this ad. The very next day, Apple withdrew the ad, apologized, and said, we miscalibrated our audience's emotions, and this ad will never see light of day again. So this is a transgression, an example of a very, very recent perceived transgression. It wasn't probably intentional, but it was perceived. The age-old example of a transgression, which was not the company's fault, is that of Tylenol in 1982. 7 consumers died from consuming cyanide-laced Tylenol. And Tylenol, as a consequence of this unfortunate event, did a massive audit of all their operations, from production to supply chain to marketing, packaging, and what have you. And they found it was not Tylenol's fault. So a transgression could be a perceived transgression, even though it's not the brand's fault. And the brand has to take note and say, what do we do? Because if we say it's not our fault, it's not our fault, it's not our fault, maybe that's the rational response, but the narrative will go out of their hands and they need to take control of the narrative in some way. So Tylenol's case, Apple's case, then there is the case of Maggi, Nestle. In India, Nestle has a brand called Maggi, where Maggi got into the hair of the regulators. They got into conflicts with each other. The regulators said, you have excess MSG in your instant noodles. Maggi said, no, we have done our testing. We do not have excess MSG. This conflict became, food for media. And the consumers started perceiving all kinds of challenges, and the brand started losing share and started really hurting. It took 5 years for the dust to settle down and Maggi to get back to its dominant market share position. And then more recently, I'll close with that, is the case of Boeing. Boeing 737 MAX crashes, the 2 twin crashes, as we call them in the book, 2018-19. And the brand's response to those crashes has taken the company into really, really a murky space. And they are right now facing a huge strike, which has already set the company back by $600 million, besides the almost $40 billion they have lost as a consequence of their poor response to the first 2 crashes. So here are 4 examples which constitute brand transgressions as we capture in our book.
It's really helpful. And we'll include a link to your book in the show notes. So if people are certainly interested in those, 200 or more examples, they'll be able to read those as well. So if a business of any size, a brand of any size, if they experience a transgression, small or large, what are the first steps that the 2 of you recommend that someone takes?
So the first step, which is our first principle, is titled "Do the Right Thing." Wow, that sounds almost like a no-brainer or very obvious, but we were kind of surprised at how often that doesn't happen in the case of transgressions in a corporate setting. And yes, there are many reasons behind that, because there's worry about how it will impact shareholder returns, potential lawsuits. But in our research, we found that if brands do not do the right thing, they invariably lose out in the end. So I'm going to go back to Tylenol's example. And this was in 1982, so there was no social media. Imagine if that were happening today. But even at that time, their market share dropped from 40% to 8% literally overnight. And there was talk about this is a brand that will never recover because 7 people died, right? And so the CEO at that time, conferred with his colleagues, and he came up with the decision, two decisions. One is, first, how will we save the customer? And second, how will we save our brand? So that's not a usual choice or not something that is openly shared when transgressions happen in large corporations. But this is the route James Burke, who was the CEO at that time, took. And Tylenol's response is now considered a gold standard in business operations. So what did they do? So he first went on national television at that time and apologized. And then he told customers, please do not buy Tylenol till we can get to the bottom of what happened. They were transparent. They invited regulators in to examine and audit their supply chain, their manufacturing. They launched a 24/7 hotline where live people were responding to customer concerns. They were putting media reports several times a day. They wrote letters to doctors and hospitals asking them not to prescribe Tylenol. So this was a very unusual stance that was taken. And it came from the position of we cannot and will not allow another death, right? And there was probably resistance from within the company that this is probably, there is, research has shown that there was resistance. And people were concerned about, is this an overreaction? And shouldn't we wait till we get to the bottom of it before you go out and say, don't buy our product, and things like that. Unfortunately for Tylenol, another incident took place in California. This happened in Chicago, and then another incident took place in California a few months later. And at that time, the CEO's decision was even more radical. He pulled off all advertising. They pulled out all Tylenol from retail shelves. They stopped selling and manufacturing Tylenol till they could get to the bottom of it. And so this, as a result, and as the regulators examined everything, they found there was no problem. There were talks of a disgruntled employee or other reasons, but none of that was validated or confirmed. And because Tylenol did the right thing and was acted with lightning speed and was transparent in its communication, they came to be perceived as the victims by consumers, which is again very unusual, right? When somebody is so seriously affected by it. So our finding in our research has shown that while it may in the short term be the more difficult path, such action of doing the right thing always pays. So there were experts who said nobody will ever put another Tylenol in their mouth, no matter what happens. But Tylenol not only regained its market share, but it exceeded its market share. There was a new law passed within 2 weeks saying that all pharma companies need to come up with tamper-resistant packaging. And Tylenol came up with that within a week. And that is the tamper-resistant packaging we all see in every prescription medication or over-the-counter medication available anywhere on the planet today. So this is an example of of not only that they took ownership, that they communicated transparently, but they also took action to ensure that something like this will never happen again. Right? So this is an example, a gold standard of what a company can do. And we can talk about how other companies didn't follow this route and what was the outcome there.
I have a question about, if you're that company and that's your thought process, what would you say to them? Yes, you must do the right thing, but the company may fail, right? Do you have advice for the CEOs that are going through a transgression, what they could think from the business side of it, when knowing doing the right thing is going to tank it? What advice would you give them just overall? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Can they make it through this? What motivational advice would you give them to do the right thing?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, Nicole. It's very challenging. You're almost saying that, look, you are going to die, and therefore, what advice do I give you? How can you die in a happy state of mind? So that's a very difficult, a very challenging question, and we don't profess to have a clear answer to that. What we have covered in this book is cases where companies, tried to squeeze out of the jam by misrepresentation, by deception, by absolute lies. And we have enough cases to show that those companies did not survive. On the other hand, we have a lot of cases where the companies put out everything out there. This is what we did. We apologize. We are transparent. We made a mistake. The good news is that many of these companies have survived, and not only survived, they have thrived. So to add one more wrinkle to the beautiful story of Tylenol that Shalini shared, they spent close to $300 million at today's prices in the recovery effort, and they ended up with a 48% share of the recovery effort. Even though most experts said Tylenol is dead, Tylenol is dead, Tylenol is dead. So we cover the case of a company called, a brand called Dalcon Shield. In the case, it's a forgotten case, but we really think we need to remember. Dalcon Shield was the first intrauterine device for women to get inside their body for preventing births. It was a birth prevention mechanism. It was unfortunately not a very well-researched mechanism, and it damaged the bodies of thousands and thousands of women. Thousands of women. The company stonewalled and survived for about 7 or 8 years by trying to deflect, by trying to attribute blame, and literally when victims were suing the company, they questioned their morals and all kinds of things. You've seen movies like The Outsider with Russell Crowe and all that kind of stuff. So they did everything in the book to avoid closing down, but ultimately they went bankrupt. It took 8 or 10 years for them to go bankrupt. There is another company that we covered, which is Snow Milk in Japan. Snow Milk obviously is a milk products company, was a milk products company. And because of their production problems, 12,000 Japanese consumers suffered food poisoning. And the company again started deflecting, distracting, lying, misrepresenting, deceiving for several months and years. And ultimately the truth came out and the company shut down, and they were taken over by a couple of other companies. They were bought out by some other companies. So, you can get legal counsel on this. And my guess is, our joint guess is, Shalini and I have talked about it, the lawyers are probably going to not be comfortable with going and doing the right thing and taking accountability. But again, it's not a heart-based message. It's not a faith-based message. It's a hard-nosed clinical message that our case studies are revealing, that if you are in trouble and there is a perception that you are on the wrong side of the law or on the wrong side of humanity or whatever, you can hide all you want, but sooner or later, there is this internet, the digital democracy, the information democracy. We are living in a very different world, and the truth will come out. There is another case which is hot, which is Volkswagen, right? The German automobile. They installed emission cheating devices in their cars. And when it was found that they had actually got these devices installed in the car to underreport emissions to get through the market barriers in certain Western nations. Initially, they said, oops, we didn't know about it. But ultimately, it was found they did. The CEO knew about it. There was an email that New York Times unearthed, which was email in the email box of the CEO, and he knew about it several years before it was installed. And right now he is MIA because he's wanted for criminal activity. So, it's a hard question. The CEOs can take a call and say, no, we can't do this because we'll be in a jam. And we totally understand that sentiment. We totally understand that emotion. What we have to share is you can try, but we can't put money on that strategy because that's what we have learned through our research. It will probably give you a little longer breathing space, but the way the world is structured today, the way information travels at warp speed, the way, we love talking about the younger generation. They are so values conscious. They are insisting that companies are held accountable for their social violations. So we are living in a very different time together. Sorry, I'm not answering your question directly, but we do not have a magic bullet.
No, and I knew there wasn't. I was just looking to get more out of you about it, right? Because I know those listening, you have to do the right thing, right? But when it comes to their business, and if it's their baby, right, this is what they have grown, they're going to have those other questions. So I was just trying to pull more from you because I know the listener and their thought process of this is going to kill my company. What other thoughts can I have in order to put the right steps into play? Can you, I may already know the answer, and maybe our listeners, our podcast is titled, of course, Not Your Average CEO Lifeline. Can you each tell us what you feel not your average CEO is and what that means to you?
Not your average CEO is somebody who's creating something unique, somebody who's a younger company, and I believe has the tools, the capability to incorporate into the DNA of the company the 8 principles that we have laid out so that their brand reduces the likelihood of facing transgressions, and if and when they do face them, would have the tools to quickly recover for them without much damage. Larger corporations have a huge problem. They're like Titanics. Turning them around takes a lot of time and energy and effort, but not your average CEOs are in the process of designing the blueprint of their companies and can incorporate these principles into the DNA of their company. A great example is Patagonia, right? So the CEO there set out with the goal of, I want to make profit, but I will not do that at the cost of the environment. And then in his own words, I paraphrase, he says, people think I'm crazy, but every time I have placed the environment first, I have made more money. So profits were never compromised, but it was the company has been uncompromising in its passion to protect the environment in everything that it does, right? The first company to launch ads which said, don't buy our product on Thanksgiving. I mean, who's heard of that? Everybody wants to sell their product, right? So not only educating consumers, but encouraging them not to overconsume. Or the first company to encourage reuse and recycle or repair your clothing, right? And again, the profits kept going up. They never decreased. So there we have several examples of those in the book also that we talk about.
Sorry, I was just going to add to this wonderful example of Patagonia. There is another company, and surprise, it's an ice cream company, which we believe is an incredibly, really good company called Ben and Jerry's. Why do we believe it's a great company? Why do we believe it's a great brand? Because Ben & Jerry's has made a choice to craft an organization and a brand which just will not compromise on the dignity of human beings. And they create flavors which are named after marginalized communities. And they take sometimes the government head on if they find that the government is not being fair to certain segments of society by launching these flavors. And that is their brand of activism, which they're engaged in. Now, let's take a step back and think about it. This probably costs Ben & Jerry's customers. It probably costs them profit. They're probably taking a hit by not siding with certain sections of society, but choosing to go with the sections of society which respect human beings. So that, we believe, is a very authentic stand that they have taken. Just like Patagonia, Mr. Shunard, who's their CEO, has said in his will, which was recently revealed, that when I die, I want to give this money to a sustainability fund. So from start of his enterprise to the end of his life, he has committed himself to this goal, which is a very, very amazing thing to do. And Ben & Jerry's have shown a similar kind of role model for the world. And of course, we make choices. Some people agree with them, some people do not. So we think these are two amazing sets of brands and people who are definitely worthy of studying, if not emulating.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. It has been an episode that we have never touched upon in our 3 seasons. So thank you for bringing your extreme intelligence on this topic to our listeners and our audience. Can you just quickly tell them, and we will, of course, include it all in the show notes, where they can find more from the both of you?
So we have a website, which is the title of our book, www.brandtransgressions.com. So that has more information about the book, how we can be reached, where you can purchase it, our contact on LinkedIn. So we look forward to interacting with your audience. And thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline with your hosts Danielle Cuomo, CEO, and Nicole Glitchio Els, COO. This podcast has been sponsored by Virtual Assist USA. If you'd like to know more about the hosts or exploring virtual assistant services, visit virtualassistusa.com for more information.